And that day we were very lucky to see the moon also. So we saw the exact half moon.
Right.
Which was beautiful. We didn't see the stars. Pakistan is following the old model about going to space. The old model is that you send a military pilot to space and you send him through a space agency. UAE attempted to land on the moon last year. It didn't work.
Right.
But they sent the Hope mission around Mars. How did it happen? Through partnerships with universities in the US, like Colorado University. And the Mangalyan mission, I think, was sent in a budget that was less than the film Gravity.
Hello and welcome to InferTalks, a podcast where I put you in the room with some of the biggest thought leaders and changemakers from around the world. Today I'm joined by first ever Pakistani astronaut. She's among the Virgin Galactic founder astronauts, first Pakistani polar adventurer, and founder of the Space Trust, an organization dedicated to promoting space as the new frontier for peace. My guest today is Miss Namira Salim. Miss Namira, welcome to InferTalks.
Thank you.
All right, Ms. Namira, before we start off our conversation and delve into the many aspects of so many things that you've achieved, let me really ask you, you're someone who's doing so many things. You're an adventurer, you're someone who is also an astronaut, you're also someone who's running her own organization dedicated to promoting space as the new frontier for peace. Let me then ask you, where did it all really start from, all this interest in terms of doing so many things?
Well, I think I was born with a very unique spirit as a Pakistani young girl growing up here in this country. And from the beginning, I wanted to be different. And I always say that space makes my DNA. So I was born believing that I would become an astronaut and go to space. And I started telling my parents when I was very young, maybe like 5 years old. I would cry and tell them that, send me to space. I don't want to play with toys. So it was just an inborn thing.
And who exactly was in your family that sort of nurtured that interest in terms of, your passion for space?
My father. He showed me the stars when I was very little, and I just got totally smitten by the stars. I fell in love with the stars, and he showed me the northern constellations. He was in the army, so he knew how to navigate the night skies, and I learned that. And as a teenager, I would only, in fact, stargaze every night. I hardly had many friends. I'm an introvert. I'm not very social. So, it was just the best time I ever had. I bought my first telescope when I was for my 14th birthday. That was my gift from my father. So the stars were always my best friends.
So what were your friends like? I mean, when you had so much of passion and interest for space itself, I'm sure the kind of interest you would show about space itself, I'm sure not so many would be interested in having those kinds of conversations. So how would you sort of satiate your appetite for space?
The funny thing is that when I started, it all started in Pakistan, actually, because a friend of mine, Salman Hamid, Dr. Salman Hamid, he also has his own podcast called Kainati Chai. And he promotes and teaches astronomy in Urdu through his podcasts. So he was the first person in Pakistan around the age of 15, 16 who set up the first Astronomy Society of Pakistan. And my best friend actually introduced me to him. And I became the first female member of that first Astronomy Society. So stargazing evenings became a part of my life. Climbing stairs to look through the biggest reflecting telescopes, refracting telescopes, looking at the rings of Saturn, looking at Jupiter, looking at the moon. I mean, it was an amazing feeling. Just looking through a telescope makes you feel that depth, and you get into the silence of space, and it's very profound. You actually feel like you're actually there. It's an incredible experience. So like-minded friends, when you have a passion for something, I think you just end up finding them. And of course, Pakistan was the last place, but it became the first place for me to find like-minded individuals. And in fact, Dr. Salman Hamid was, he came to see my space flight at Spaceport America in the US, and I very proudly invited him. And he did 2 of my interviews also, so it was very nice to have him as a friend throughout the journey.
So are there any things that you plan on doing in collaboration with him, given that, he has also sort of complemented your interest for space?
Well, he is a professional astronomer, astrophysicist. He has a PhD. That's not my background, but yes, we have some common colleagues in the space industry who I met recently, and he wants to do something in Pakistan to promote the education of space with me and with Salman. So hopefully, we will come together as a team and do more things in Pakistan to promote STEM education, astronomy, and even like future space travel for, young girls and boys, because space is not commercial, it's private, and everyone can go to space. So we will create those opportunities for more and more people from Pakistan to go to space.
Right. So you came up with this organization called Space Trust. Could you tell us a bit about it? What does it really do?
Space Trust was founded in 2015 as an organization that promotes, as you said, space as the new frontier for peace on Earth. And the reason for that is because we have entered into a new space age, which is the commercialization of space. And that is why even NASA astronauts today don't go to space on NASA rockets. They go to space with SpaceX, with Elon Musk's rockets, or, with the Russian space agency, which is also like an agency who sells tickets, to send different astronauts to space from different countries. So with this commercialization, more and more people will start going to space, and they will have the opportunity to see Earth from space, which appears beyond the political boundaries. And since the dawn of human space flight, astronauts have said, like over 60 years back, going back that far, that when we see the world from space, it appears as one planet, one humanity, one world, in a million, in a vast universe. So why do we have, wars and conflicts on Earth? And why can't we make peace on Earth? So I feel that now that paradigm shift can be experienced by many people because of the commercialization. And similarly, politicians and world leaders will have an opportunity to also go to space. And I will make sure that we have the first peace summit in space. That's what I promote through my nonprofit. And we have all these commercial space stations being built. We have a, lunar gateway in the cislunar orbit, which is like the orbit, that will help us achieve humans to, settle onto Mars, because we'll have a stop on the way, to like another stop in space, so that it's not a direct flight from here to Mars. So the gateway is being built, and similarly private stations in the low Earth orbit. So they will all be like, opportunities where anyone can rent a space and go up there and do their own thing. So I think we should also like take the UN there and, different governments and leaders and put them all together and have a peace summit and think about all our historic issues from up there, from a different perspective.
Right. And if I may ask you, and this has to particularly do with your contribution as a space diplomat, could you tell us a bit about, we've seen all kinds of different, or heard about different kinds of diplomacy itself, but what is it exactly that a space diplomat does differently from what a traditional or what other diplomats might be doing?
Yeah, so basically space diplomacy is still a very, distinctive term used in the UN system. And it has only this meaning that basically whoever goes to space, all the spacefaring and the new space nations, emerging space nations, and whoever privately has, any body in space orbiting the Earth or wherever has to, follow a certain code of conduct based on international space treaties, and they must behave in a certain way so that they don't harm each other up in space. So that is what space diplomacy is in the UN context, in the international context. But in my context, I have redefined it in my own way, and I take it more literally, and I promote it more literally, and I say that, okay, we can actually make peace from space, and why not send world leaders and politicians into space on a two-way ticket, not on a one-way ticket, and make them go up there and sit there and actually, rethink politics, rethink foreign policy, rethink, world peace, and come back with a paradigm shift to make the world more peaceful. So that is my definition, which is why I have kind of become a thought leader in space diplomacy and being nicknamed or called the space diplomat in a different way.
That's very interesting. How does it really make you feel as someone, as a Pakistani, who's ended up becoming an astronaut, and then at the same time, you're the first woman and a first person as well. how does that accomplishment or sense of accomplishment make you really feel about all this experience?
Yeah, I collected many firsts. I mean, I'm also, out of over 800 people signed up to go to space with Virgin Galactic and with deposits paid, I'm the first female customer of Virgin Galactic to go to space also.
The first female.
Yeah, I collected
Customer.
many firsts. I mean, I'm also, out of over 800 people signed up
Right.
to go to space with Virgin Galactic and with deposits paid, I'm the first female customer of Virgin Galactic to go to space also. And I was on the second commercial space flight, which means that it was pretty risky. So, yeah, I took the risk very early on and I accepted my number. I was astronaut number 19, so that includes all the employees, and, I was the first female. So, it feels great to collect those firsts, but I'm really proud that in the end, even though I bought this ticket, which was an early investment into the commercial space industry, so that normal people can go to space tomorrow at a cheaper price, I, bought the ticket back in 2006. I started negotiating with Virgin in 2005 that I want to be the first Pakistani. And just imagine that between 2005 and 2023, nobody has gone to space from Pakistan, which means that nobody went to space as an official astronaut or through our space agency. So I'm very proud that I, was able to maintain my record, set my record, and set an example that a country that does not have its own human spaceflight program can still encourage human spaceflight through the commercialization of space.
And how did that process really work, in terms of shortlisting potential customers that can go to the space or to the suborbital flight of Virgin Galactic itself? How did that process really work? Walk us through.
Well, it was just being at the right place at the right time. There were 44,000 applicants apparently, but I represented a very diverse profile because I'm a Pakistani, 100%. I have only the Pakistani passport, and I was a resident of Dubai and Monaco in the south of France. Plus, then I started working in the space industry and I became an international player in the global space industry. So I brought a lot of diversity to our founder astronaut club, which is why I was selected. And I was really one of the first ones to call them, and the first one from Pakistan, of course, to call them when they had not even set up offices. And they were looking to sell tickets, and they did not know who would believe in this back then, like in 2005 and 6. But there were people, very few people who actually believed in this, and I was one of them. In fact, we had a crash during our test flights in 2014 when the pilot also died.
What happened?
Well, there was a test flight and it was a pilot error that happened, due to which the space flight crashed. But incidentally, the co-pilot ejected with his seat and he survived. But the pilot died, and he was the one who who committed an error. So there's a certain mechanism in the spaceship that was later on investigated by the Federal Aviation Authority of the US, and that particular function was created into an autopilot system. So nobody can make that mistake again, and the spaceship cannot crash.
And it was, I'm presuming this must have been a test flight and it didn't carry any passengers.
No, it didn't, but it was two pilots. So pilot and co-pilot.
Right.
It was a test flight. Before the commercial flights began in 2014, this crash happened. And at that time, the entire media was after Sir Richard Branson, who's the founder, and they were giving him really bad press that, oh, now he's going to stop, space tourism cannot happen, he cannot fly to space. But I was the first person to give a statement to Huffington Post that Richard Branson will still fly to space, and that article is still, on Google. So before Richard Branson actually gave his own views about what he would do after the accident, I was confident that space tourism is here to stay, and we would fly to space and we will make it happen. And I was right. So I'm glad that we did it.
And so what do you have to say to people or critics who might say that, being a space tourist is a luxury for the rich and the privileged? Is it just about that, or do you think there's more than that, or there's more than just privilege that sort of, makes you achieve that feat?
Well, as I said, I bought this ticket in 2006. I paid $200,000. Now the flight price has gone up. It's $450,000. But in the long run, it's the same thing like the aviation industry, When the first transatlantic flight took off, I believe it was around $50,000. But today you can go from London to New York in like $200, right? So it's the same exact model. And in the future, by paying for these flights early on in the game, and investing in the future of human space flight commercially, we have invested in the future industry which is going to carry the common man to space. Like now we may have, flights around the world where our, spaceships can actually go to space and stand still, and then, we can reach we can achieve a flight of like 16 hours in like 2 hours, for example. So, there are many applications. Plus, in these flights, we have a lot of experiments happening for the, benefit of science and technology on Earth. So this is not a thing of the rich and famous. It may seem that way right now in the beginning, which is the case, I guess, when you invest in anything on Earth, in any business. You end up paying a lot more and it doesn't pay off immediately, but in the long run, it becomes a thriving business. So this is just about an early investment to make space for every person who dreams of going to space in future, especially from emerging space nations and new space nations, and those countries like Pakistan where we still don't have a human spaceflight program. So inshallah, I think I will be able to take some young girls with me for training in the next couple of years, and they can become future astronauts. As an individual, if I'm able to do that, I think I'll be very proud of that.
No, we certainly wish you all the best towards that end. Let me also draw your attention to another important aspect, and this has to do with Indian Space Organization, ISRO, which was successfully able to, send its lunar
lander,
Chandrayaan-2.
Yes.
Despite having, come across a failure in its initial flight.
Yes.
They very well resiliently pulled off, the successive flight that they took off. Let me ask you, when you actually look at India's own example and then compare Pakistan to it, where do you think that Pakistan has sort of, gone awry? Or perhaps where do you think can things be sort of corrected in terms of, its future trajectory?
Well, I've said this many times, and I'm going to repeat myself. I don't want to compare Pakistan to India, but of course, in India, they do tap into their human capital and they encourage it. I went to space as the first Pakistani. I have not heard from our space agency until today. And this is the same space agency, SUPARCO, whom I have worked very well with in the initial years when I was known as the first Pakistani astronaut back in, 5-10 years back. And they were very inclusive. I introduced them to ROSCOSMOS myself personally.
And how long ago was this?
In 2015, when I founded Space Trust, my nonprofit,
Right.
I invited Chairman Suparco to Monaco, and that event was very high profile. I had the Deputy Director General of Roscosmos, the Russian space agency, the government, the Prince of Monaco at my event, and I made that first meeting happen over breakfast. I am also the first Pakistani and the only one who brought Thales Alenia Space to Suparco, which is the largest European space manufacturing systems company in Europe. And that was back in 2011 when I became the Honorary Consul of Pakistan to Monaco, and I set up the first consulate there in Monaco. So, I mean, as an individual, I've contributed to the space sector of Pakistan. As a future astronaut, I have contributed, but I never heard from them. And this is the difference between India and Pakistan. That when India sent its Mars mission and Chandrayaan-1, Chandrayaan-2, I was the only Pakistani to congratulate them. And the Indian press, of course, took it very positively. I even made statements that space diplomacy is the only route to peace between India and Pakistan. Our media did not criticize me at all because my statements were extremely sophisticated, very neutral, and coming from somebody who is like globally, a participant of the space industry. So I appreciated that, somebody from South Asia has actually taken a giant leap for South Asia. Of course, we have a lot of potential in Pakistan. I have potential. I want to do things, but if our own government and if our own space agency doesn't even want to recognize it, and, the least I expect, for example, was when I came back, I said, well, I think I should be given the highest civil award. But it was not even entertained. So if that's how our people are, then you become a bit disheartened and you believe that, okay, we really have to go out of Pakistan to achieve our goals. Because our dreams cannot be, become a reality in this country. So unfortunately, that is the difference. Our human capital, our talent does not get the same support that people get in India. And they have sent these missions which have cost them less than what a Hollywood film costs. So the Mangalyan mission, I think, was sent in a budget that was less than the film Gravity. So, they do it, they produce their, spacecrafts just on the model that the commercial space industry follows in the rest of the world. So it costs very little, and they have the talent, so they're able to do it successfully. And similarly, in the international world, people like Elon Musk are now taking, NASA astronauts to space at a fraction of a price as compared to the billions of dollars that one shuttle used to cost NASA. So basically, commercialization of space is bringing the price down for human spaceflight. And India is able to achieve it because, of course, the human capital is a lot less. It costs less, but it's very rich, and they have the talent. Our talent for space, the week I was going to space, SUPARCO announced that they're going to make a base on the moon with China. So I guess, we will only go to space when China will take us to space, right? But if I compare other emerging space nations, which are countries like the United Arab Emirates, a very good friend to Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, another great friend, what have they done? They have taken, they have paid, they've bought tickets also for their astronauts with NASA. They have trained their astronauts, the UAE, and they have sent their astronauts on SpaceX rockets. Saudi has sent the astronauts on through Axiom on a SpaceX rocket. So, everybody is buying a ticket to go to space in the commercial space.
So what do you then think? Is it a matter of priorities out here that perhaps it doesn't fall, in the list of perhaps say top 10 priorities that Pakistan should set out for its own, perhaps, when it comes to its own R&D or research and development in areas of STEM?
See, the thing is that Pakistan is following the old model
And
about
what's
going
that?
to space. The old model is that you send a military pilot to space and you send him through a space agency. So they're going to do it through the Chinese space agency. But what I was trying to say about the emerging space nation, on the new space nations, which is what we call them these days, the UAE, Saudi Arabia, is that they have not waited to develop a space agency which will actually create its own rocket, and then maybe 200 years from now they're going to send their first astronaut to space. No, they trained their astronauts in Russia or with NASA, and they bought the tickets through commercial carriers like SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket. And immediately they were able to, within years of opening space agencies, those space agencies are just 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years old between the UAE and Saudi Arabia. So the moment they opened their space agencies, the UAE must have started before 2015, because when I launched Space Trust, I remember that, the Russian delegation came to Dubai. They started signing partnerships with Russia, ROSCOSMOS, and NASA for the, sole purpose of sending their own landers. Like UAE attempted to land on the moon last year, it didn't work.
Right.
But they sent the Hope mission around Mars. How did it happen? Through partnerships with universities in the US, like Colorado University. Okay, and they were able to develop that by sending their own Emiratis, engineers who've now become even PhDs. They learned how to build those things through people who know how to do it. And then they were able to tap into the commercial market and get tickets for their astronaut, train them in a matter of 6 months to a year or 2 years, and achieve real astronauts, like career astronauts. Not real, I would say, even I'm real, but career astronauts, who are inspiring the entire nation. But here we are still waiting for the first military pilot to go to space with China, and it's going to be with the space agency. We will not buy a ticket or train our astronauts with NASA or Russia to send them to space today, so that tomorrow the youth can follow that inspiration. But I can promise you one thing, that even though I'm a single individual and I don't have that much power to take the nation to space, But because I'm in the commercial space industry, I have just been offered a scholarship to do a master's in Applied Astronautics, which will be a 2-year program. And it will actually include training that NASA astronauts take.
And where would this be exactly? In what
That'll
university?
be in different parts of the US.
All
and
right.
I've been, selected for this scholarship. I will even do like training as basically I'll train like a scientist astronaut. It'll be like training that military pilots get. So it'll be like going to military, being disciplined, learning about survival in space and all of that, doing spacewalks, training, everything which is called EVA, extravehicular activity, and IVA, and you name it. Like, so this opportunity is huge. And the reason that I've been selected is because, of course, I'm a source of inspiration for girls in Pakistan. And once I start this training, in the next couple of days, we will have an opportunity to take more girls with us and train them to become astronauts. And this opportunity is being brought to me by a company called BLinc, which is Borderless Labs, Inc. So Borderless Labs, Inc., which is BLinc, has brought this opportunity to me, and I'm very grateful to them. And the whole vision is to bring as many girls with us to space as possible who speak different languages around the world and who come from every country of the world. So he has picked me to bring more Pakistanis. And I can proudly say that most likely I'll be able to train a few astronauts in my lifetime before anyone else does in Pakistan. And I think that'll be a great achievement. I'm not competing with our space agency, but if they don't even have the, the spirit to congratulate the first person from Pakistan who went to space, then I take pride that I will take more girls with me to space. And I think I will leave a legacy and make history in the process, and that'll encourage more of a brighter future for our future astronauts and scientists and the next generation.
No, I really wish more power to you on that front. Let me also ask you another important question, and this has to do with your organization is dedicated to promoting space as the new frontier for peace. And when we look at it globally, we see organizations like SpaceX and so many others that are involved in tapping into the commercial aspects of the space industry itself. But when we look at Pakistan, we really don't see that much opening up of space for the private sector. How critical do you think it is for a country like Pakistan? You see so many other new spacefaring nations doing more or less similar kind of things to follow on that path. Why do you think is it important for even Pakistan to do something along those lines?
Well, that's the only way. That is the future of human spaceflight, of space. It's the new space age. It's the era that we are living in. It's privatization of space. So without tapping into that, we cannot go to space anymore. This is a very conventional approach, So if the space agency thinks that they need to take astronauts only who are military pilots and who can go to space with China, that's great. I'm sure they'll get to the moon also. But the private enterprise will not be encouraged. So there is a gap, just like there is a gap in other new space nations where they have been able to send their astronauts by tapping into the commercial market, but they still haven't, they are too young to encourage the private enterprise. So the privatization of space can happen at an individual level.
Right.
We have some startups here, I think. We have companies who are interested.
And apart from astronauts, where else do you think can progress be made by private sector organizations to make their much needed contribution to Pakistan's space industry or to the global space community itself?
If we have, we have defense contractors in this country. We have representatives of international defense contractors. If private individuals or companies can partner with them and they can make their own, spaceship, of course, that can become a launch provider for private people to go to space.
What about satellites?
Satellites too, but there are too many satellites out there, I think. Now, the bigger thing is that, we are going to build private space stations where a lot more can happen. So Pakistan has been making satellites forever. I mean, yes, we need satellites, but now students can make satellites, cube satellites. My own nonprofit is going to develop the first 3-unit cube satellite.
And what will this be really about?
this is going to carry peace messages to space, and 2 student experiments.
Right.
And then just 2 weeks ago, I was at the UAE Space Agency and I was offered a workshop there. I was invited to be part of a workshop, and I learned how to create my first cube satellite, which is like an ice cube satellite. And there were 3 teams, and we proposed different experiments. So my team proposed like desalination of water in space, and to study that process, because eventually, you know, we are finding water in different planets, on the moon, Mars, and we want to know how we can, you know, separate that water from the other elements and make it, you know, sort of habitable for humanity to, once we move there, we'll need that water, right, for our survival. So these are the things. I mean, there are so many things we can do, but the first thing is to I think for private companies to maybe partner with defense contractors or create their own companies to be able to find the funding to create their own spaceships. Okay, if they want to do more satellites, that's fine. But creating geniuses like, this SpaceX, Elon Musk, what has he done? He has actually encouraged NASA to finish its space shuttle program back in 2012. And he was able to take the first human space crew like to the International Space Station in 2020 on the Dragon capsule. So he took NASA astronauts. That is a service, right? He reduced the price of the space shuttle by billions of dollars. NASA pays him a fraction. So this is how we can contribute. Our spaceships can be utilized by other countries, if not Pakistan.
And so are you also planning to strike collaborations with different universities in Pakistan as well?
Yes, of course. When I came back from space in November, I presented the flag to the president that I flew to space, and I had a press conference.
What was his first response?
He was extremely kind, and he was very proud of me. He really commended me, Dr. Arif Alvi, and that's because I met him in November 2022, and I told him that I'm going to go to space very soon. And then, I go to him following November. 11 months later, I was already in space, and I took the flag, and, I present my flags in a very unique way. I framed them very nicely.
Right.
So that photo is published. It's on my Wikipedia page. He was extremely appreciative, and I'm very grateful for all the time and, appreciation that I got from him.
And so let me also ask you, if you've set out any hard and fast milestones in terms of, bringing more awareness about space. And since you yourself are a very inspirational woman for not just for Pakistan, but for also women all around the world, what is it that you're planning to do through your space trust to say, I'm going to take this many women and girls into space, or perhaps this is what I'm going to do in terms of, increasing their awareness and their outlook about space itself?
Well, the first thing is that, we are going to promote our second program now, which is STEM education or STEAM education. So I have a partnership with 2 universities. One is the University of Arizona, and the other one is in Kenya, University of Nairobi.
Right.
So we have a 3-party tripartite partnership, and we have already won a free launch to space for our satellite, which is going to be built by students between those 2 universities for capacity building and to promote STEM education. We still don't have funding for the CUBE satellite.
Right.
It's a 3-unit satellite. But because of my work in the space industry and with the UN and one of the professors from Nairobi who's also won a previous contest, with the UN, we got the free launch. Now we are looking for funds. So even we need funding. So far, Space Trust has only operated on my personal funds. But, there's a limit to how much funds I can give to it. So we are stuck at that stage where we need funding for the satellite. And then, of course, through the cooperation I'm going to build with BLinc, I will be training a lot of girls from Pakistan to learn how to do a suborbital flight initially, and then eventually, they can also train as scientists, astronauts, and, hopefully be ready and be trained, because there are not enough trained astronauts on this earth. And because, very soon we will have rockets which can carry 100 people to space, and that's on SpaceX, with the Starship. So if Starship is ready, which it will be ready in the next couple of years, we need 100 astronauts to board on that Starship. So we will try to train as many people as we can. And of course, for that also we need funding. And I don't know if we can ever expect, this government to give us any funding, but funding should come, from our government.
Right. And now let me ask you about your own personal experience on that flight itself. Unfortunately, so far throughout this conversation, we've not been able to explore that aspect at all. But how was it really like when you were in space? How did it really feel like?
Well, the G-forces were a bit hard because when we trained in a different way back in 2007. We thought we'll be reclined, and if we are reclined, then the G-force is on the heart, and you're pressed down on the seat. And that was easier, but when we actually went up, we were upright. We did not recline our seats.
Okay.
So going to space upright, when the rocket took off at 50,000 feet, we reached space, breaking the sound barrier in 1 minute. That basically, I had to endure during that process at 3.5 G forces, which does not sound like a lot, but when it comes from head to toe, it's pretty hard on the body. And even though it was like 15 to 20 seconds, it felt like it lasted forever, and I felt like my face was going to fall on the ground, like be pulled like glue down to my feet. That's how hard the gravitational forces were pushing me down into my seat. And then, you reach zero gravity and you're floating like a feather, so it's the opposite feeling. Paradoxical, because you're very light, and even though we had a parachute like on our backpacks, which was very heavy on the ground, in zero gravity you don't even feel the weight.
How is it like, I mean, to be in the zero gravity? Is it like when you're underwater, or how is it like?
Kind of. It's like you're floating and you don't feel any weight.
Right.
So like, of course you have to hold on to things, otherwise you would go up, but a bit like being in water, yes, underwater.
But in terms of sensation, how do you feel? Do you feel a bit dizzy, nauseatic,
no,
or anything of that sort?
Not at all. Not in zero gravity. But I felt dizzy. I have trained 2 times for my, suborbital flight. So both the times in my experience, I felt dizzy while descending back into the atmosphere. So even at that point, we had to, endure the 3.5 G forces. So it was the same G forces, same feeling, but I don't know why I got nauseous always upon re-entry into the atmosphere.
Right.
So we had 2 pills, for nausea, and I took both of them.
Right.
And even then it took a while. It takes a few minutes for the nausea to go in my case. So everybody is different. But in zero gravity, the most beautiful thing, of course, was seeing the black sky, because we took off during the day. But when we reached space, the sky was black. And that day, we were very lucky to see the moon also. So we saw the exact half moon.
Right.
Which was beautiful. We didn't see the stars because, the sun still, because we took off in the daytime, the sunlight still, prevents us from seeing the stars, because we were very close to the Earth, right? Just we broke the orbit and came back. So the sunlight has its own role to play, even though the sky is dark. And then, seeing the Earth without the borders, it's called the overview effect. It's very beautiful. It's like called the blue marble Earth that you see from space, and then the black sky and the half moon. So it was beautiful, but at the time in zero gravity, they say, goes a bit slower. But for me, it was very fast.
Right.
I mean, I hardly remember what I saw, and I think I need a longer and another space flight to enjoy the
Were you able to get any pictures or?
Yeah, there's lots of videos of our experience, because we had cameras everywhere in the spaceship, but we could not take any pictures because we weren't carrying our phones or any cameras. So
was that part of the SOP, not to carry any cell phones or anything?
Yes, we couldn't, but because the spaceship had built-in cameras, so there are many videos on YouTube, and it shows the experience. But the moon was not captured by the spaceship, so I had to actually Google half moon from space, and I put that picture on my social media to show people what the moon looked like, with the edge of space, like that blue band. So what happens is when you go to space, between the Earth and space, you see a thin blue line.
Right.
And then it becomes a bit of an electric blue color, and then it blends into the dark sky. So that thin blue line is the atmosphere. It's the sky.
Wow.
Which seems this tiny, it's like maybe 1 centimeter almost,
Like visually it appears that small.
Like a little thin line.
Wow.
That is our whole atmosphere, our sky. we think it's so big from here, but when we see it from Earth, it's just a small line. It means nothing. And then it's the vast black sky, which is outer space, and the Earth below. It's incredible.
And so while you were in zero gravity, did you feel like, or, your fellow passengers, did they feel like doing something funny while they were in zero gravity?
My two fellow astronauts were British and American. They did not want to do anything funny. They
Right.
just wanted to see the view and they stuck to the windows.
Oh.
But yeah, I did. I wanted to do some spins, so I did some somersaults, just one.
Right.
And the trainer actually assisted me because, there's a skill, you have very little time. So normally, they help you do that if you want to. So I did that and I floated a bit in the cabin. And that was my very brief time in space. And like I said, time flew. I just didn't feel like I had time in zero gravity, and I need to do it again, actually.
Right, right.
Yeah.
And so now speaking of, another thing that you've actually done, and you're perhaps the only Pakistani to have visited both the North and the South Pole. How has that overall experience been like? What did you really do to prepare yourself to, do something of this proportions?
Well, I bought the ticket in 2006. I started talking to Virgin in 2005. They had not even set up offices. So in 2006, after I bought the ticket, 2 months later, Richard Branson came to Dubai and he wanted to actually introduce me as one of the first customers. So I was lucky enough to be introduced to the global media by him. And I became very well known overnight, even though I was very well known as an artist. Before that, I was in the news a lot in the UAE. But, when I had my global launch with him, I was all over the media. And when I bought the ticket, I thought, I would not even talk about it because it's going to take a while. And I'm a very private person. I don't announce my life on social media or in the news. But because I was in the launch with him, it became global news and the news came to Pakistan. And then at that time, I was quite well connected to the government. So they actually invited me. So the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting invited me and they launched me to the entire nation as the first Pakistani astronaut. And that was a big thing for me because, I was this little girl growing up in Pakistan who confidently told her cousin and friends, when I was a teenager that I would grow up to become an astronaut. And I used to make up my own terms. So I told everyone I'm going to study space sciences. And I didn't know that there was anything called space sciences. I just made it up. And there is actually a subject called space sciences, as I discovered later. So, and then I was this little girl crying to go to space when I was only 5 years old. So that launch was out of this world. I mean, that was a dream come true. And when that happened, and every year, the spaceship didn't fly. It took a while to build the spaceship, the mothership, and the fleet. Then we had a crash. So, it was taking too long. And I thought that, if I take too long to go to space, I was afraid that maybe I'll get bad press. But I didn't realize that my story became an inspiration. So in that process, while I was waiting to go to space, I decided that maybe I should go to the farthest corners of the Earth to, test my limits and to, do the best I can in this world before I break the orbit. So I decided to go to the North Pole and I found out that I was going to be the first Pakistani. So, I love to have these firsts that I collect from everywhere. So I ended up becoming the first Pakistani at the North Pole, then at the South Pole. Then when I was at the South Pole, I met a lot of mountaineers. So they said, oh, wow, we've never seen a Pakistani woman do this. So now you should go and climb Everest, which is the third pole of the world. So I started training for that. I was just going to start training.
Right.
And just as I thought about it, a friend of mine who's also going to be a future astronaut told me that, now they're going to be like the first skydives over Mount Everest. And he said he's going. I said, listen, take me with you because I would love to just skydive over Everest. It's going to be harder to climb it, and it's going to take too much training. So I thought it was more risky to do that, more challenging because it's never been done before. So I became like part of the first historic Everest skydives. And I was not only the first Pakistani, but the first Asian to skydive over Mount Everest. And it was a tandem jump. It was my first and last jump. I think the riskiest thing that I've ever done is to go to space on the second commercial flight, being the first female astronaut for Virgin Galactic as a customer. But the other risky thing that I did was my Everest skydive because 17 people died before me. Wow. And one of our fellow jumpers crashed in the rocks. She broke all her bones.
Wow.
And when I went up, we were two teams, tandem teams. on a Swiss Boogie aircraft, a small plane. And I was the one sitting next to the door. So, when the time came, I had to open the door. And then I looked down and I'm like, now it's too late. I have to just take the plunge. And I did it. I just jumped. I said, you asked for it. Now you have to do it. So I just jumped. And it takes a few seconds for a small parachute, which is called the drag parachute, to open. Until that doesn't open, at least in my case, I felt like, my heart would stop because I could feel falling from that plane, and my instructor was with me, but I felt that, speed at which I was feeling is falling down towards the Himalayas. And then the drag parachute opened and I felt like I was floating in zero gravity in the sky. I did not feel that I was, free falling at the speed of 153 miles per hour. No, you don't feel it because there's no relative distance. There's nothing around you other than the mountains under you. And you feel like a small mosquito, above all these humongous, mountains in the Himalayas. So it was amazing because it was like experiencing zero gravity in the sky. And like you said, we can, I guess, experience it underwater. But if you want to ever experience it, skydive from a high altitude jump.
Right.
And when you're free falling, you will feel it because you don't feel like you're falling. And then the parachute opened and it was a bit hard on the body because it was a heavy military parachute.
Right.
So I felt like, my knees will come apart. I had a little bit of pain in my calves. And we landed at...
was it next to the base camp or where exactly was this?
No, it's the highest drop zone in the world. So we landed at 12,250 feet. That is from where people start the dive.
Oh.
We landed there. It's the highest drop zone of the world called Shangpushe airstrip. So that's where we landed in the Himalayas. It's near Everest, but a little far from Everest.
That's still very brave of you to have, pulled off something of this proportion.
Yeah, because it was my first jump and I didn't have any practice before that.
Right.
And it was the last one. It was so beautiful that I never went skydiving again.
Wow.
Yeah.
Because you felt like this is like
the ultimate.
The ultimate.
The
right?
ultimate.
And speaking of, your experience at the South and the North Pole, what was the difference? Like being at the North Pole versus, being in the South Pole?
Yeah, it was different because the North Pole, the ice moves and it's going to melt in a few years.
Right.
So when we were at the North Pole, I had my GPS with me and I had to keep moving to be at exactly 90 degrees north. And it was nice to have that little, adventure. But then I took a lot of flags with me. I always take my flags with me. So I had the flag of Pakistan. I had my peace flag. I had the flag of the UAE and Monaco, which are my adopted countries. So I had to, plug all my flags into the snow and take pictures. But before that, in the Svalbard Islands of Norway, I did a few adventures because, before you get to 89 degrees north from where, I went to 90 degrees north, we had to wait in Norway for a very long time because the ice runway at our ice camp at 89 degrees north broke actually. So the Russians, who are the geniuses, they rebuilt the whole thing. They run the camps there. So in that time that they were rebuilding the runway due to climate change, the ice melts and all that, I was able to go into an ice cave. So it was like a little hole, in the snow. And you go in there and it's a different world altogether. It's a different dimension. There's an ice cave and you can, see icicles around you and go into these little, alleys of ice, frozen ice. And it's just a different world. It's so beautiful. I did that. I went into an active coal mine. Those were the expeditions we could do before heading to the North Pole and keeping us busy. Then there was another expedition to see the polar bears. That I didn't do because, I was like, what if they attack me and then I can't go to the North Pole?
Right.
What if I get killed by a polar bear? Because when we go for the polar bear expeditions, the tourist guide takes a gun with them, a rifle. Yeah, they can shoot the polar bear if he attacks, So it was a little dangerous, so I didn't do that. But I also did the dog sleds on the huskies.
Was that fun?
Yeah, that was a lot of fun. I have pictures. I have stuff I can share with you. It was a lot of fun. And then at the South Pole, it was... so North Pole was my first experience on ice. So the South Pole was A more difficult expedition.
Why was that?
Because I had to camp on ice for a long time. At the North Pole, I only stayed overnight at the ice camp. And the next morning, we went to the North Pole. I flew with my peace flag because, I'm not a skier or a trekker. So that was my first experience. So in those days, we as a country were being labeled pretty negatively in the media. So I just took a peace flag there. And then at the South Pole, the distance between the ice camp and the South Pole is a lot. Like, it's a few hours flight. And we camp at 80 degrees south, not 89 degrees, as in the case of the North Pole.
Right.
So at 80 degrees south was our ice camp. At that time, it was known as Patriot Hills. Now it's moved. So over there, I had more of a, experience in terms of an expedition. So I trekked on the ice, I skied a bit. I climbed the highest mountain on Patriot Hills. It's called the Repeater Peak. It's an ice mountain. And we came down, like sort of sliding on our bellies. It was a lot of fun. We saw we went around in ice tractors. We saw a wreck of a, plane crash. We did a lot. And then camping over there for 3 weeks on the ice, meeting people from all over the world was an incredible experience.
So how long did this entire expedition take place? I mean, in South Pole?
South Pole was like 3 weeks
3
almost,
weeks.
because I had to camp on ice for almost 10 days on the way to the South Pole and on the way back, because we get a lot of snowstorms and they're called whiteouts. So you don't see anything other than hazy white, things blowing around you, and you can't do anything. You can't fly. So in those days, we were only able to get together with adventurers from all over the world in the dining tent. So we had the social tent, which was our dining tent, and we had chefs there. They used to even bake birthday cakes for people, and we used to eat, hang out, sit together, meet the most incredible adventurers, people who had summited all the 7 top peaks of the world, mountaineers, skiers, adventurers. A very inspirational time, and made very good friends. And camping on ice without running water, without a regular bathroom, and surviving in those conditions for 3 weeks was a lot of fun. Then we flew to the South Pole, and over there we visited the South Pole Station, which is the Amundsen Scott South Pole Station. So over there we saw a regular building, that we find on Earth, with running water, with all kinds of facilities, because they're scientists. It's an American base. They're scientists, who go there and who do experiments, and they stay there during the summer months, spring months, and in the winter for 6-7 months they can't come out. So they have to survive in that place and grow their own crops in the greenhouse and survive that way. So that was a visit. We visited that South Pole Station. And then we came back. Then again, we had to camp on the ice and wait for the weather to clear. And then we went back to Chile, from where I came, to the South Pole, from Punta Arenas, which is the southernmost city of the world. And then I flew back to Dubai through the US.
Ms. Namira, I must really congratulate you for all the feats that you've accomplished. And I must admit, it's been a very rewarding conversation having you on InferTalks. I certainly stand enlightened on a lot of issues, but then at the same time, I suppose it was very rewarding in the sense that, you walked me through this different journey of your own personal experiences from space to different poles of the Earth. Thank you very so much for being part of InferTalks today.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It's a pleasure. And I hope that all the positive things can be applied in our country for our future generations.
And I really wish you more power to all the goals that you've set out for yourself, and for all the girls and the women that you want to impact with your work and with the legacy that you want to leave behind.
Inshallah. I'll take more girls to space with me.
Inshallah.
Inshallah.
Thank you so much for joining us for this conversation with Ms. Namira Salim. Our team works very hard to make this work possible. And it would mean the world to us if you could like and share our content. And if you'd like to stay informed about our upcoming podcasts and other work, please hit the bell icon.